Since starting at my new inner city parish 2 months ago, I've been faced with several challenges. One of them being how to deal with the seemingly endless calls, texts, and emails from supposedly desperate men seeking help. How many times have I wondered what is the right thing to do? And have even thought to myself, are these men like the proverbial Lazarus at the gate? Brothers and sisters, today's gospel account has Jesus giving us a story about two men in diametrically opposite scenarios. The rich man has everything, lives and eats like a king, and is completely indifferent to the other man, Lazarus, living outside his gate. On the contrary, Lazarus lives in abject poverty. He's the poster boy of poverty, lying down on the ground, covered with sores that dogs are licking, seemingly speechless. Jesus says of him that he longed to fill himself with the scraps that fell off the rich man's table. The story is stark and is an extreme scenario where clearly the rich man, because of his excessive wealth, had a greater obligation than the average person under God's law to feed and show some kindness to the very destitute Lazarus. Ultimately, in death, the rich man was sent to Hades, or hell, because his greed and selfishness was beyond compare, and he cared nothing at all for the suffering of his closest neighbour, Lazarus. As we know, 2,000 years ago there was no Centrelink or non-government agencies, including those of the church, tending to and providing for the poor. It was a universal obligation under God's law for everyone to care for and tend to the poor. And the more one had, the greater the obligation. So, what of us here today, 2,000 years later? How do we identify what we should do when someone rings unexpectedly on our mobile phone, texts us, or sends an email begging for help? Well, let's try to break it down. Firstly, we live in a time in the Western world, that is, where there is still poverty, but now there are numerous agencies and groups and Centrelink, as I said earlier, to provide for them. But we also know the cost of living, in particular housing, has gone through the roof, and so many people can't make ends meet anymore. But today we also have new challenges. Many also find themselves in poverty because of the effect of drugs, alcohol, gambling, broken families, domestic abuse and violence. Should we give money to someone who's going to use the money to buy drugs or alcohol? I think we all know the answer to that question. No, we shouldn't. I'm not sure about all the calls I've been getting, the exact cause of their situations, but one thing has stood out which contrasts with Lazarus: the constant badgering to the point that I had to block a couple of the numbers. One of the numbers I blocked was definitely a scam. This is a category of the so-called poor who we now must be on constant alert about. They're not poor at all, but criminals that lie and extort from the vulnerable. How many people, brothers and sisters, now work for organisations whose primary aim is to scam and steal from those who may have a soft heart for the poor and are easily deceived? From personal experience, having been scammed a couple of times already, I can tell you it's not fun. So, brothers and sisters, in the world that we now live in, before we do anything, we must first discern, hopefully through prayer and intellectual reasoning, whether the person is a scammer or not. If they aren't and truly need help, the next question is whether we are obliged to help or not, and how we can help. If someone given money would automatically spend it on drugs, alcohol or gambling, then giving them money is the wrong thing. The former priest of my inner city parish has since advised me that if anyone calls, get them to come in and then give them food or a food voucher. Good idea, for if they're scammers, they definitely won't turn up and show their faces. Equally, if they're just after money for drugs or alcohol, they probably also won't turn up unless they take the food because they've spent all of their money. Sometimes giving money, if we have it to spare, is the right thing to do. But on giving money, though, let me warn you, I've given money to a few men since I've been in this inner city parish, and instead of these men being satisfied and moving on, they started badgering me week after week for more and more. In all my years of helping the homeless, I've never experienced such demanding and persistent behaviour. I'm having to learn very quickly. On the other hand, brothers and sisters, there is a woman outside the presbytery gates. Let's call her Meg. Meg has a dog with her, a constant companion, who barks with wagging tail every time he sees me. Meg is quiet, patient, unassuming. I have provided for her a number of times, but in the 2 months I've known her, she's never asked for, let alone demanded, anything. Because of her undemanding nature, it would be very easy to overlook Meg in her need, for she truly is the Lazarus outside the gate, for whom God expects me to provide. When we meet that Lazarus waiting near our gate, we'll know for sure, as we've gone through a process to verify that they are truly in need. Then, with prayer and reasoning, we can determine what best we can do to help them. In finishing, let me recall a quote of the late Father Bob Maguire. He said, "The poor are not always grateful. They can be belligerent, but they are poor and they are ours." So let us pray, brothers and sisters, that we will employ right judgment, wisdom and discernment to identify what we must do and then act accordingly. For as Jesus warns us in today's Gospel, the consequences of not addressing the needs of those in the most abject of situations is eternal hell. The consequence for indifference to those in need is indeed stark.